Today, we're going to pull back the curtain on something you've probably felt, but maybe never had a name for. It's this kind of hidden system that operates just beneath the surface of the movies you love. Basically, an industrial blueprint for how films are designed to capture and then manage our attention. I mean, really think about it for a second. That jump scare that landed perfectly, or the swell of music that made you tear up right on cue. It feels like magic, right? But what if it's actually more like a machine? That very feeling, the one of being expertly guided through an emotional experience, is exactly what we're going to break down. Okay, so let's put a name to this thing. The core concept we're talking about is called the Phantomoperand. It's this whole system that turns human feelings, fear, intimacy, even critical thought, into a reliable, marketable product. You can almost think of it as the ghost in the cinematic machine. So here's our roadmap for today. First, we'll nail down what the Phantomoperand really is. Then, we'll trace its origins back to the 1970s, see how it was engineered in the 80s to expand its reach, watch it mature into this all-encompassing system, and finally, we'll ask the big question: what does this all mean for us today? All right, let's get into it. Our story really kicks off in the 1970s. This was a super pivotal decade, a time when Hollywood basically forged the modern blueprint for capturing and holding the attention of a massive audience. And who was the key architect of this blueprint? Well, it was Steven Spielberg's 1975 masterpiece, Jaws. This film didn't just invent the summer blockbuster as we know it, it created a repeatable formula for selling fear. This quote just frames the experience perfectly. Jaws literally trains you. It turns you into a scanner, constantly watching the water, just waiting for that shock you know is coming. The feeling isn't random at all. It's a scheduled bodily reaction produced completely on demand. So how did it pull this off? Well, first, it created the event movie, the must-see film of the summer. It used controlled deprivation. By hiding the shark for most of the movie, it forced our own imaginations to become the engine of suspense. And the editing acts like a harness, constantly tightening and releasing our attention in this really predictable rhythm. This was the moment the industry found its model for what we call convergence, getting everybody to look at the same thing in the same way at the same time. But here's the thing, not every filmmaker was following this new blueprint. Just 4 years later, Andrei Tarkovsky's Stalker came out, and it offered this powerful counter-argument. It's a film that actively, deliberately resists the logic of the Phantomoperand. So instead of giving you a scheduled shock, Stalker gives you uncertainty. It withholds easy answers and just forces you to sit with ambiguity, to really experience the weight of time itself. It wants you to think rather than just react. In other words, it makes you work for the meaning. This comparison really illustrates the two poles, right? For Jaws, editing is a harness that guides you to a guaranteed, reliable reward. But for Stalker, editing is more of an ethical act that creates boundaries, forcing you to endure uncertainty. One film converges everyone's attention. The other creates estrangement, making you see the world, and even the act of watching, differently. Okay, so let's move into the 1980s, because this is when the system really evolved. After the massive success of the Jaws model, the Phantomoperand didn't just repeat the formula over and over. Instead, it diversified. It started learning how to engineer a whole new range of sensations. The 80s were a decade of really rapid innovation for this system. With E.T., it mastered engineered intimacy, packaging vulnerability and wonder for mass consumption. Then you have a film like Brazil, where it learned to aestheticize ideology, to make the horror of bureaucracy actually look like a compelling design style. Soon after, Blue Velvet came along and turned transgression itself into a premium product, selling discomfort as a kind of boutique thrill. And finally, you get They Live, which turns the entire system into a literal allegory that viewers are invited to decode, making the critique itself part of the fun. And this timeline just shows how incredibly quickly the system adapted. All throughout the 80s, it just kept expanding its toolkit. It learned to absorb and sell not just fear, but warmth, critique, and even the pleasure of feeling like you're seeing through the system itself. And that brings us to the final stage, the maturation of the Phantomoperand. By the late 90s and into the 2000s, the system had become so sophisticated that it could integrate almost anything into a seamless, high-yield product. A perfect example, Titanic.
Here, the system just perfected the art of fusing romance with historical catastrophe. It created an emotional interface that was so perfectly optimized that it could package mass death into a reliable, tear-jerking spectacle that, of course, broke every box office record.
Then, of course, came The Matrix, which basically updated the Phantomoperand for the digital age. The key innovation here is that the product being sold wasn't just action, it was the feeling of understanding. It turned philosophical doubt and the idea of seeing the code into a thrilling, incredibly marketable commodity.
And by 2008, with The Dark Knight, the system reached a whole new level of maturity. It learned how to package moral ambiguity and political seriousness as premium features. It actually invited critique, but it did it in a way that made your consumption of the film feel like a mature, thoughtful act. It perfectly blended the experience of critique with the act of consumption. So, after all these decades of refinement, what does this hidden system mean for us, right here, right now, in a world that is just saturated with media designed to hold our gaze? Let's just quickly recap the journey. The Phantomoperand started with standardization, creating one reliable model for sensation with Jaws. It then moved on to diversification in the 80s, learning to sell a really wide range of emotions and ideas. And finally, it achieved total integration, where even the most complex or difficult subjects could be absorbed and sold as a polished, high-yield product. And that leaves us with one final and I think crucial question. The Phantomoperand was perfected for the big screen, but its principles, standardizing sensation, managing attention, turning feeling into a product, well, they are more alive today than ever. So how do you see its descendants operating right now in the endless scroll of your social media feeds and in the perfectly curated cues of the streaming platforms that are sitting right there in the palm of your hand?